The little boy's screams cut through the rumble of motorcycle engines like a knife through silence. 5-year-old Mason burst through the parking lot of Ruby's diner with tears streaming down his freckled face and his blonde hair wild from running. His small sneakers pounded against the hot Texas asphalt as he ran straight toward the group of bikers filling up their tanks at the gas station next door. "Please help me," Mason cried out with his voice breaking into sobs. "They're beating my mama. Please somebody help." His tiny hands grabbed onto the leather jacket of the first biker he reached. That biker was Dante Thunder Williams, a 32-year-old man with kind brown eyes and arms covered in tattoos that told stories of a hard life turned honorable. Dante looked down at the terrified child clinging to him and felt his heart drop into his stomach. Behind Mason, through the diner's wide windows, he could see exactly what the boy meant. A woman with auburn hair was being shoved against a wall by 2 men while a third blocked the door. The other bikers in Dante's club, the Road Guardians, were already moving before he gave the signal. Dante knelt down fast and put both hands on Mason's shaking shoulders. "Listen to me, buddy," he said with his voice steady and calm even though fury burned in his chest. "You did exactly the right thing coming to get help. Now I need you to stay right here with my friend Sarah, okay?" He nodded toward a woman biker who immediately came over and put a protective arm around Mason. "We're going to get your mama right now. I promise you she's going to be safe." Mason nodded through his tears, and Dante saw something in those scared blue eyes that reminded him of his own nephew. The boy was trying so hard to be brave. Dante stood up and looked at his crew. There were 8 of them total, men and women who rode together every weekend, and every single one of them had the same fire in their eyes. They had all seen the woman being attacked. They had all heard the child's desperate cry for help. Without a single word needing to be spoken, they moved as one unit toward the diner. Their boots hit the pavement in rhythm like an approaching storm. Dante led the way with his heart pounding and his mind crystal clear about what needed to happen. Next, the bell above the diner door chimed cheerfully as Dante pushed. It opened with force that sent it banging against the wall. The 3 men attacking the woman spun around in shock. The biggest one, a man with a shaved head and a scar across his jaw, had been holding the woman by her arm while his buddy pulled her purse away. The third man by the door froze when he saw 8 bikers filing into the small diner like an army. "Let her go right now," Dante said with his voice low and dangerous as thunder before lightning strikes. His presence filled the entire room. The woman, whose name tag read Claire, had a split lip and terror in her green eyes, but when she saw the bikers, something shifted in her expression from fear to desperate hope. The scarred man laughed nervously and tried to play it cool. "This ain't your business, friend," he said while tightening his grip on Claire's arm hard enough to make her wince. "The lady owes us money, and we're just here collecting what's ours." Dante took 3 slow steps forward with his crew spreading out behind him to block every exit. "I'm going to say this one more time and one more time only," he said with each word dropping like a hammer. "Let her go." The tension in the diner was so thick you could cut it with a knife. The cook had disappeared into the kitchen, and the only other customer, an elderly man, had wisely shuffled out the back door. It was just the bikers, the 3 attackers, and Claire, who stood trembling against the wall with her uniform torn at the shoulder. The man holding her looked at his 2 friends, and Dante could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. They were outnumbered and outmatched, but pride and stupidity made dangerous companions. The scarred man shoved Claire hard toward Dante, and she stumbled forward. Dante caught her gently while his friend Rodriguez, a stocky biker with a gray beard, stepped forward to steady her on the other side. "You people need to mind your own business," the scarred man snarled while backing toward the door with his friends. That's when Claire found her voice, and it came out stronger than anyone expected. "These men have been harassing me for 3 months, she said while touching her bleeding lip with shaking fingers. My ex-husband sold his truck to them, but never finished the payments before he ran off and left me and Mason with nothing. They keep saying I have to pay his debt. They've threatened me at work, at home, everywhere." Her voice cracked, but she kept going. "Today they followed me here on my shift and said if I didn't give them $2,000 by tonight they'd make sure I never saw my son again." The words hung in the air like poison, and Dante felt his jaw clench so hard his teeth hurt. He had grown up watching his own mother struggle as a single parent after his father left. He had seen her work 3 jobs and still come up short. He had watched people try to take advantage of her kindness and her desperation. The protective instinct that rose in him now was primal and unstoppable. The scarred man and his friends had made it to the door, but Dante's crew member, a tall woman named Jackie with arms like steel, blocked their path. "You're not going anywhere until the police get here," Jackie said calmly while pulling out her phone. "I've already called them. They should be here in about 5 minutes." The 3 men looked at each other with panic replacing their earlier bravado. "You can't prove nothing," the scarred man spat. "It's her word against ours." But Dante smiled without any humor in it at all. "Actually, buddy, this whole diner has security cameras," he said while pointing up at the small black camera in the corner. "And you just assaulted a woman in front of 8 witnesses who include a retired police officer, a lawyer, and a veteran who served 2 tours overseas. So yeah, we can prove everything." The color drained from the scarred man's face. He looked trapped and angry and desperate, which made him dangerous. He reached for something in his jacket, and that's when everything happened fast. Rodriguez moved like lightning for a man his age and had the guy's arm twisted behind his back before the weapon, which turned out to be just a knife, even cleared his pocket. The other 2 attackers tried to rush the door, but found themselves facing 4 bikers who had no intention of letting them pass. There was a brief scuffle that lasted maybe 10 seconds before all 3 men were sitting on the diner floor with their hands being held firmly behind their backs by bikers who knew exactly how to restrain someone without causing injury, but also without allowing any chance of escape. Claire had collapsed into a booth with her face in her hands, her whole body shaking with the release of fear and stress that she'd been carrying for months. Dante sat down across from her and waited quietly until she looked up. "Thank you," she whispered. "I didn't know what to do anymore. I've been so scared." Her eyes filled with fresh tears. "Mason shouldn't have had to see them grab me like that. He ran out the back before I could stop him. Is he okay?" Dante smiled gently, and his whole face softened in a way that transformed him from intimidating biker to kind human being. "Mason is one brave little boy," he said. "He ran straight to us and asked for help like a hero. He's outside right now with Sarah, and she's probably giving him ice cream from the gas station. That kid loves his mama very much." Claire let out a sound between a laugh and a sob. "He's my whole world," she said. "After his father left us 6 months ago, it's just been me and Mason against everything. I work double shifts here at the diner, trying to keep our apartment and keep him fed and clothed. I don't have $2,000. I don't even have $200 saved up." She looked down at her hands, which were red from working so hard. "I thought today might be the day they really hurt me. I thought Mason might lose his mama." Her voice broke completely on those last words. Dante reached across the table and put his hand over hers in a gesture that was both comforting and respectful. "You're not going to lose anything," he said firmly. "Those men are going to jail, and they're never going to bother you again." The police arrived exactly 4 minutes later, with 2 squad cars pulling up outside with lights flashing. Officer Martinez walked in and immediately recognized Dante. "Thunder," he said with a nod of respect. Dante and his crew had helped Officer Martinez's department before, reporting dangerous road conditions, helping stranded motorists, even assisting in a search for a missing child last year. The road guardians had a reputation in this part of Texas as bikers who looked out for the community. Officer Martinez listened carefully as Dante, Claire, and the other witnesses explained what happened. The security camera footage was downloaded to his tablet right there in the diner. The 3 attackers were arrested and taken away in handcuffs, still protesting weakly, but with no leg to stand on given the evidence and number of witnesses. After the police had taken statements and left with their prisoners, Claire finally walked outside to find Mason. The little boy had been waiting with Sarah, and when he saw his mother, he ran to her with his arms outstretched. "Mama!" he cried while throwing himself into her embrace. Claire scooped him up even though he was getting big for carrying and held him tight while crying into his hair. "I'm okay, baby," she whispered. "I'm okay. You were so brave." Dante watched the reunion from a distance with his arms crossed over his chest and something warm spreading through his heart. Sarah walked over to stand beside him. "You got that look, Thunder," she said with a knowing smile. "What look is that?" Dante asked while not taking his eyes off Claire and Mason. "The look that says this isn't over for you," Sarah replied. "The look that says you just found something worth sticking around for." Dante didn't answer, but Sarah's words echoed in his mind as the evening went on. The road guardians decided to stay at the diner for dinner to make sure Claire felt safe finishing her shift. They took up 3 tables and ordered enough food to keep the kitchen busy. Claire moved through her work with visible relief, though her hands still shook occasionally when she poured coffee or wrote down orders. Every time she passed Dante's table, their eyes would meet for just a moment, and something unspoken would pass between them. By the time her shift ended at 8 o'clock, Mason had fallen asleep in a corner booth with his head on a rolled-up jacket that Rodriguez had offered as a pillow. Claire approached Dante's table while untying her apron with exhausted movements. "I don't know how to thank you," she said quietly. "You and your friends saved my life today. I was starting to think nobody cared anymore." Dante stood up and his full height made Claire have to look up to meet his eyes. "Plenty of people care," he said gently. "You just hadn't met the right people yet. Listen, I know you've been through something terrible today, but I want you to know something important. You don't owe those men anything. Your ex-husband's debt is not your debt. I called a friend of mine who's a lawyer and she confirmed it. They were trying to scam you using fear and intimidation." Claire's eyes went wide. "Really?" she breathed. "I don't owe them anything." Dante shook his head. "Not one single penny. And now they're facing assault charges, harassment charges, and a whole list of other charges that mean they're going to be someone else's problem for a very long time." Fresh tears rolled down Claire's cheeks, but these were different from the earlier ones. These were tears of relief so profound that her knees felt weak. "I've been carrying that weight for so long," she said while putting her hand over her heart. "Working myself to death, trying to figure out how to pay money I didn't even owe." She looked up at Dante with gratitude shining in her green eyes along with something else. Something like the first spark of connection between 2 people who recognize something worthy in each other. "Can I ask you something?" she said hesitantly. "How did you know to help me? Why did you care?" Dante was quiet for a moment, thinking about his answer carefully. "My mama raised me and my 2 sisters alone after my dad walked out," he finally said. "I watched her struggle every day of my childhood. I watched people try to take advantage of her because she was a woman alone without protection. I watched her cry at night when she thought we were sleeping because she didn't know how she'd pay the rent. I made a promise to myself back then that if I ever had the chance to help someone in that situation, I would. Every single time. No exceptions." The vulnerability in Dante's words created a bridge between him and Claire that went deeper than the drama of the day's events. She saw him truly then, not just as the intimidating biker who had saved her, but as a man who understood her struggle, because he had witnessed it through the eyes of a child who loved his mother. "Your mama raised a good man," Claire said softly. "I hope I'm raising Mason to be like you." Dante smiled with real warmth. From what I saw today, you're doing an amazing job. That boy has courage and heart, and those things come from good parenting. He hesitated for just a moment before continuing. Look, I know this might be forward given everything that happened today, but I'd like to help you and Mason get settled properly. Make sure you're safe. Maybe help you find some resources for single parents in the area. No strings attached. Just one human being helping another. Claire studied his face carefully, looking for any hint of ulterior motive or hidden agenda, but all she saw was genuine kindness. Why would you do that for strangers? She asked. Dante looked over at Mason sleeping peacefully in the booth, and then back at Claire. You're not strangers anymore, he said simply. The moment Mason grabbed my jacket and asked for help, you became people I care about. That's just how I'm built. Over the next few weeks, Dante became a constant presence in Claire and Mason's lives, though he was always respectful and never pushy. He showed up at the diner during Claire's shifts just to make sure nobody was bothering her. He brought Mason a used bicycle that his nephew had outgrown and spent a Saturday afternoon teaching the boy how to ride it in the park. He connected Claire with a community organization that helped single parents with everything from legal aid to food assistance to childcare resources. Slowly and surely, Claire began to rebuild her life with a support system she hadn't known existed. The other road guardians pitched in too, treating Mason like a mascot and Claire like family. Sarah taught Claire some basic motorcycle maintenance, which led to Claire admitting she'd always wanted to learn to ride. Rodriguez fixed the constantly breaking air conditioner in Claire's apartment without charging her a penny. Jackie helped Claire update her resume and practice interview skills for a better paying job at the local hospital. Through all of this, something deeper was growing between Dante and Claire, though both of them were cautious about acknowledging it out loud. They would catch each other's eyes across the diner and smile. They would sit together in the park watching Mason play and talk about everything from childhood memories to dreams for the future. Dante learned that Claire had wanted to be a nurse before she got pregnant young and married fast to a man who turned out to be unreliable. Claire learned that Dante had served in the military before coming home to Texas and starting the motorcycle club as a way to create brotherhood and purpose for veterans and others who needed belonging. One evening about 2 months after they first met, Dante took Claire and Mason to a Road Guardians charity event where the club was raising money for children's hospitals. Mason was beside himself with excitement, seeing all the motorcycles lined up and getting to sit on several of them while pretending to rev the engines. Claire stood beside Dante, watching her son laugh with pure joy, and felt something shift in her chest. Dante didn't hesitate for even a second. He reached out and took both of Claire's hands in his larger ones. "I've been falling for you since the day Mason grabbed my jacket," he admitted. "I just didn't want to push or make you uncomfortable given everything you've been through. But yeah, Claire, I feel it too. I think about you all the time. I want to be there for you and Mason, not just as a friend, but as someone who's building a life with you." The words hung in the air between them, full of promise and possibility. Around them the charity event continued with music playing and people laughing and motorcycles rumbling. But in that moment, it felt like they were the only two people in the world. Claire stepped closer and Dante wrapped his arms around her in an embrace that felt like coming home. "I'm scared," Claire whispered against his chest. "I'm scared of trusting again and getting hurt." Dante rested his chin gently on top of her head. "I'm scared too," he admitted. "But I think the best things in life require us to be brave. And you're the bravest person I know." From that night forward, Dante and Claire built something beautiful together with patience and respect and genuine love growing between them. Dante never tried to replace Mason's father but became a steady male figure in the boy's life, who showed up for soccer games and helped with homework and taught him how to change a tire and treat people with respect. Claire slowly healed from the trauma of her past relationship and discovered her own strength with Dante's encouragement. She enrolled in night classes to pursue her nursing degree, and Dante rearranged his work schedule to watch Mason on those evenings. The Road Guardians became Mason's extended family, with each member playing a role in his life. Sarah taught him about being respectful to everyone regardless of appearance. Rodriguez taught him about fixing things with his hands. Jackie taught him that strength comes in all forms. A year after that first meeting, on a warm Texas evening with fireflies dancing in the air, Dante organized a surprise for Claire and Mason. He took them to a beautiful spot overlooking the lake where the whole Road Guardians Club had gathered, with decorations and food and music playing softly. "What's all this?" Claire asked with wonder in her voice as she looked around at the fairy lights strung between trees and the table set with her favorite foods. Dante got down on one knee right there in front of everyone, including a 5-year-old Mason who was bouncing with excitement because he already knew what was coming. "Claire," Dante said with his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes, "you and Mason came into my life like a thunderstorm on a clear day, unexpected and powerful and impossible to ignore. You've taught me what it means to build a family based on love and respect and showing up every single day. I want to keep showing up for you every day for the rest of my life." He pulled out a ring box and opened it to reveal a simple but beautiful diamond ring. "Will you marry me?" Mason shouted. "Say yes, Mama, say yes," before Claire could even process the question. She laughed through sudden tears and looked from her excited son to the man who had proven his love through consistent action and genuine care. "Yes," she said clearly. "Yes, Dante, I will marry you." The Road Guardians erupted in cheers and applause, with several of them wiping away their own tears because they had all watched this love story unfold and had invested in it just as much as the couple themselves had. Dante stood and slipped the ring onto Claire's finger before pulling her into a kiss that was tender and full of promise. Mason ran over and they both scooped him up in a group hug, with the three of them laughing and crying together. Later that evening, as the celebration continued around them, Claire pulled Dante aside for a quiet moment. "Do you remember what you said to Mason that first day?" she asked. "When he was so scared and asked you for help." Dante thought back to that moment that now felt like both yesterday and a lifetime ago. "I told him he did the right thing coming to get help," he said. "I promised him his mama would be safe." Claire nodded with tears shining in her eyes again, but this time they were happy tears. "You kept that promise," she said. "But you gave us so much more than safety. You gave us a family. You gave us hope. You showed me that not all men leave and not all love ends in pain. You taught Mason what a real man looks like. Someone who protects and provides and shows up with consistency and care." She put her hand on Dante's chest right over his heart. "That little boy ran to you crying for help, and you could have just called the police and walked away. But you stayed. You kept staying. And now here we are building a life together that I never dreamed was possible." Dante covered her hand with his and looked deep into her eyes. "I stayed because I recognized something special in both of you from the very beginning," he said. "I stayed because my mama taught me that family isn't just about blood, it's about who shows up. And I wanted to be someone who showed up for you." The wedding took place 6 months later in the same spot by the lake where Dante had proposed. Mason served as ring bearer, wearing a tiny leather vest that matched the ones worn by the Road Guardians, and he took his job very seriously. Claire walked down the aisle to acoustic guitar playing her favorite song, wearing a simple white dress that made her look radiant. Dante stood at the altar with his crew flanking him as groomsmen, and when he saw Claire coming toward him, tears streamed freely down his face. The ceremony was beautiful and personal, with both Dante and Claire writing their own vows. Claire promised to trust in their love and to build a life based on partnership and respect. Dante promised to always be the man that Mason ran to for help, the one who could be counted on no matter what storms came their way. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, and they kissed to seal their commitment, the road guardians revved their motorcycle engines in. Celebration creating a sound like thunder rolling across the lake. The reception was filled with laughter and dancing, and stories being told about how the couple met. Officer Martinez gave a toast about how he'd seen many things in his years on the force, but watching the road guardians step in to protect Claire that day had restored his faith in community. Sarah talked about how Dante had always been the heart of their club, but that Claire had taught him how to open that heart fully. Rodriguez made everyone cry when he talked about watching Mason transform from a scared little boy into a confident young kid who knew he was loved and protected. And Mason himself, now 6 years old and growing more confident every day, stood on a chair and declared loudly that he had the best mama and the best new dad in the whole world. As the evening wound down and the stars came out overhead, Dante and Claire stood together watching Mason play with the other children at the reception. "You know what the best part of all this is?" Claire said while leaning into her new husband's embrace. "What's that?" Dante asked while wrapping his arms around her. "That day when Mason ran to you crying, he was running toward our future," Claire said. "He was running toward everything we have now. Sometimes the scariest moments lead us exactly where we need to be." Dante kissed the top of her head and held her close. "That little boy saved me just as much as I saved you that day," he admitted. "I was going through the motions of life, doing good things, but not really connecting deeply with anyone. And then Mason grabbed my jacket and looked up at me with those scared eyes, and something in me woke up. Something said, this matters. These people matter, and I need to show up." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching their son play. "We're going to have a good life together," Claire said with certainty in her voice. "The three of us and this extended family we found." Dante nodded with his own certainty matching hers. "The best life," he agreed, "because it's built on real things. Trust earned through action, love proven through consistency, and the understanding that family means showing up even when it's hard." Years later, when people would ask Dante and Claire how they met, they always told the full story with nothing left out. They talked about the fear and the violence of that first day, but also about the courage of a 5-year-old boy who knew when to ask for help. They talked about how a group of bikers became heroes simply by doing what was right. They talked about how trauma can be transformed into triumph, and how the darkest moments can lead to the brightest futures. Mason grew up knowing his origin story, knowing that he had once been brave enough to run toward help instead of away from danger. That knowledge shaped him into a young man who stood up for others and who understood that real strength meant protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. He eventually joined the Road Guardians himself when he was old enough, riding beside Dante and carrying on the tradition of being someone others could run to when they needed help. Dante and Claire had 2 more children together, a daughter named Hope and a son named Justice, names they chose deliberately to reflect their values. The family thrived with Dante's motorcycle shop growing into a successful business that employed several other veterans and provided them with stable income and community. Claire completed her nursing degree and went to work in the pediatric unit of the local hospital, where she specialized in helping children who had experienced trauma. She understood their fear because she had lived through her own. She knew how to talk to scared mothers because she had been one. Her past pain became the foundation for her ability to help others heal. The Road Guardians continued their community work, organizing charity rides and fundraisers, and always keeping an eye out for people who needed help. They became legends in their part of Texas, the bikers who looked scary but had hearts of gold. Parents would point them out to children and tell stories about the Road Guardians who had helped someone they knew or someone they'd heard about. The club grew larger but never lost the core values that Dante had built it on: protection, service, brotherhood, and showing up for those who needed it most. on the 10th anniversary of the day they met. Dante and Claire returned to Ruby's diner with Mason, who was now 15 years old and taller than his mother. The diner looked almost exactly the same, except for a small plaque by the door that the owner had installed. It read, "Where heroes ride and families are forged," with the date of that fateful day engraved below. They sat in the same booth where Claire had collapsed crying after the attack and where Dante had promised her that everything would be okay. Mason looked at the security camera in the corner that had captured the evidence that sent Claire's attackers to prison and shook his head in amazement. "I barely remember being that scared little kid," he said. "It feels like a different lifetime." Claire reached across the table and took his hand. "You were so brave that day," she said. "You ran toward help instead of freezing in fear. That courage is still in you, sweetheart. I see it every day in the young man you're becoming." Dante put his arm around Claire and pulled her close. "We all showed courage that day," he said. "You had the courage to keep going even when things were impossible. Mason had the courage to ask for help. And I had the courage to get involved instead of looking the other way. That's what made this family possible. Courage from all of us." They ordered the same meals they'd eaten that first evening when the road guardians had stayed to make sure Claire felt safe. They laughed and told stories and marveled at how much life had changed in 10 years. Outside the diner, other members of the road guardians pulled up on their motorcycles, having planned to surprise the family with an anniversary ride. When Dante, Claire, and Mason walked out and saw their extended family waiting for them, they were overwhelmed with gratitude. These people, this community, this love that had started with a desperate child's cry for help had become something beautiful and enduring and real. As they all rode together down the Texas highways with the sun setting in brilliant colors ahead of them and the sound of engines rumbling like distant thunder, Dante thought about all the ways life could change in an instant. One moment you're just filling up your gas tank on an ordinary day. The next moment, a crying child grabs your jacket and changes the entire direction of your life. He thought about how he could have ignored Mason that day or just called the police and walked away. He thought about all the moments in life where people choose whether to get involved or stay distant. And he felt grateful beyond words that he had chosen to get involved, to show up, to care. Because that choice had given him everything that mattered. A wife who was his partner in every sense of the word. A son who looked at him with respect and love. A family that extended far beyond blood to include everyone who rode beside them. A life filled with purpose and meaning and the deep satisfaction that comes from being someone others can count on. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Dante glanced over at Claire riding beside him with Mason sitting safely behind her on the bike she'd learned to ride years ago. She caught his eye and smiled with her whole face glowing with happiness. And in that moment, Dante understood the real truth about that day 10 years ago. Yes, he had saved Claire and Mason, but they had saved him right back by giving him a reason to open his heart fully and build something lasting. They had all saved each other. And that was the real story worth telling. Not just about bikers coming to the rescue or about justice being served, but about how broken people can find each other in the darkest moments and choose to build something beautiful together. About how family is created through showing up consistently with love and care and commitment. About how one act of courage from a 5-year-old boy can ripple outward and change multiple lives forever. That was the story that Dante and Claire would tell for the rest of their lives. The story of the day thunder rolled in and changed everything.